This is Adjuster Stories brought to you by Adjuster TV and Veteran Adjusting School. And now your host, Guy Grant.
Hi, everybody. Guy Grant here with Adjuster Stories with Guy Grant. Welcome today. I'm sitting here with one of our graduates, Nora Housey. Is that how you say your name?
Yep, Housey.
Housey, yeah. I always look at it, I'm like, Housley, what is it? So, when did you graduate, Nora? Like April 22, 23?
Yep, April 2022. And I think my start date was actually almost a year to the day, like right now.
Wow.
3 years to the day. Because I want to say it was around like the 13th or 15th of March of 2022.
Nice. And you did 20 years in what? Air Force or Army?
Yes, Air Force.
Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you came to us, were you still on terminal leave or?
Yes.
You were?
Yep. I had just started my terminal leave.
So you were a baby, went into the Air Force, did your 20, and came to us before you even got out.
Yes.
What made you think you wanted to be an adjuster when you got out of the military?
Well, actually, it wasn't it wasn't my plan right away. When I was, going through and getting ready to separate like my 6 month mark, I still didn't really know what to do. So honestly, I just Googled good jobs for retired military. And of course, it came up with security, police officer, and all that stuff. And catastrophic claims adjuster popped up, and I had no idea what that was. So I started researching it. And I was like, oh, it's the people, that search the hurricanes, and then realized it's also the ones when my dishwasher leaks, the ones that come and take pictures. And I was like, well, that sounds nice. I could do that. And I went on Facebook and, to those new adjuster groups and asked around and heard about Voss and reached out to you guys and went from there.
Wow. Wow. It's so funny. None of us ever get into this business because we thought about it when we were in high school, right? There is no college education for being an adjuster. It literally is just something that either somebody tells you, or in your case, which is even more trippy, that you just like, well, what's that? Let me look into that. So,
and almost everyone I run into, it's almost everyone's second career.
Right. It certainly was like my fifth career by the time I got into it. But yeah, awesome. So when you came to the school, you basically knew nothing about the industry.
Correct. Besides the, classes and I got my license and stuff. So besides that, I knew nothing else besides just going through the licensing course. So that's mainly what taught me anything about it.
Right. And what's so funny is that all these guys go and they take that licensing course and they spend their $350, and then they get their license and they're like, yeah, I'm an adjuster. But that is so far from the truth.
Yeah. I mean, technically.
Yeah, technically you have a license to do it, but you have absolutely zero knowledge of it. And it's sad that that's kind of what they're told. Get this license. Take an Xactimate course, right? Go to this 4-day class in Texas, and you're going to be an adjuster. And then they get to the class. Well, I know because I did it, right? 20 something years ago. But you go to the class and all they talk about is how great it is and how much money they make. But you have no knowledge about what it is.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know one of the things that I warn people about now is, because people will ask like, oh, how to get into it, and even contractors, they'll be like, oh, should I be an adjuster or roofing sales? I have that conversation with them a lot because they get paid a high percentage on their sales. But if it's, a slow season, they don't have like how daily claims, we can also do the water claims, the dishwashers, the fridge, and they don't have that option. So I have the conversation with them a lot on that, but they're surprised how much paperwork it involves on the adjuster side.
Yeah. But on the flip side, on the roofer side, you're married to that homeowner forever.
Yeah.
All the way through the end.
Yeah, so the payout's bigger, so I get the incentive on their side, but it's like I'd rather once I'm done, like, okay, I did my part and move on to the next, maybe have to come back for revisions, but I was like, I don't want to have to visit that person 6 times.
Right. Right. Well, and I know because I have lots of roofer friends, and we were roofers for a short time in 2010 for like 2 months. But you literally, when it's all said and done, you've got to go back to that insurer and say, okay, now you just got your recoverable depreciation for $4,000, and that comes to us. And inevitably, they're like, well, no, I'm not paying you that. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's much better to go in, say hello, do a good job, and leave and run down the road
Yeah.
for sure. For
Yep.
sure.
Yep. I enjoy that part of it.
Yeah.
I
Um,
use I use the famous Voss saying I'm eyes, ears, measuring stick many, many times.
yeah. So tell me a little bit, or tell the listeners a little bit about your experience at Voss. So you came with zero knowledge. Did you leave thinking you understood what was happening?
Yeah, I think so. I really enjoyed it. I felt pretty comfortable with it. I luckily, since most of my military career was spent in administration, the Xactimate side of things and the paperwork side of things weren't too bad. It was
Uh-huh.
just learning the system, but I'm so used to computers that learning that part of things was just, oh, it's just another program to use. So that was kind of second nature to me. For me, it was more just the learning how to find the damage and actually getting up on the roof and using a ladder. That was all new to me. So I really liked the hands-on piece of the class, especially, and then the storm week, like going out and actually doing it and
Yeah.
putting everything together.
Yeah.
So I thought that was the best.
Yeah. Well, and that's, what we did for a long time is we'd have folks like you that came in that knew admin but didn't know construction. The flip side of that is I had a contractor that knew everything about construction but couldn't turn on a freaking computer.
Mhm.
So, for us it was always interesting. We'd talk about it at night after we'll talk about you guys and everything. But, just how to navigate that class for
Wasn't that
because
my class?
what?
Wasn't that my class where we had the contractor who barely could use a computer?
Yeah,
Or I know we
probably.
had a contractor. He was awesome. Like once he got outside ladder work, he showed us how to find damages on things. But then when it came to the computer work, we would have to show him how to just navigate.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But the cool thing for the school, as long as we did it, was when you all left, you were all had at a base rate,
Hmm.
and like you probably remember this, but we built the foundation, we built the framing, we dried the roof,
Hmm.
everything was ready, and it was up to you once you left to actually do the rest of the construction, right?
Yeah.
Down to the painting.
Yes.
So, speaking of that, so you got out 3 years ago this month,
Mhm.
and how long did it take you to get a claim?
Um, Well, it was about 2 weeks after I got home, since I kind of took a road trip and
Right?
detoured on a vacation after class.
I
So,
remember that.
I'm going to count it 2 weeks after I officially got back and started reaching out to firms. Um, and the funny thing was, it wasn't even a firm on your list initially. I used one of those, was it Adjuster Portal or Adjuster, I don't know, one of those online ones and put my information in. And they needed someone in North Dakota, just this middle of nowhere claim. And they were like, hey, we found your information on here. And, I know we don't like to use, they found out I was brand new and you could just hear the worry in their voice. And they had never heard of us, so they didn't know anything. So they were like, well, just go out and take pictures and then we'll help you with everything else. And I was so happy because I've heard horror stories of first claims, like a full fire and water. And I went out there and it was one story modular home with wind damage. And like you just pull up and half the roof was missing. And it was like the easiest claim in the world. I was like, oh, this is
Nice.
wonderful. Yeah,
Nice.
you couldn't have an easier first claim. And so, I turned it in and I used all the Boss, not the templates, but the, putting the headers and everything. And
Uh-huh.
and I turned that in and they called me like immediately the next day and they were like, I thought you were brand new. Like, where'd you learn all this? And I told them about Voss and they were saying, oh, besides some, just corrections in their report format, because they had specific GLR, they were like, oh yeah, this is great. So they've been one of my primaries companies since.
Yep. And they became a partner shortly thereafter.
Okay.
So they've taken others of our graduates since then.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. So yeah. I was really thankful that that was my first claim, and but I stayed pretty steady after that. I mean, I stay pretty steady generally all year. I'm really really busy in the summers, obviously, and then it slows down during depending on the winter.
right. Just for those who are listening or watching us right now, Nora lives in North Dakota.
Mhm.
She's like the only adjuster in North Dakota. Nobody go
Yeah,
lives
there's
in,
not very many of us for sure.
right, right. And so being up in North Dakota is your claims got to be pretty far apart.
Definitely. In fact, I just got one this morning that is almost 500-mile round trip. So, and the funny thing is, it's actually in South Dakota. So I'm going crossing the border, but there's just lack of adjusters. So
Right,
I'm so used to driving far at this point. So, all the firms that I work with, we all have, they all do mileage, but anytime a new firm reaches out, that's one of the first things I check. I'm like, well, do you cover mileage? Because I know the claim's going to be at least 2 hours for me almost always, and
right,
I'm not going to run it for free.
right,
I
right.
will always say yes, I'll do claims. I just at least want mileage. And some do T&E for driving, which is even better.
Wow, that is good.
Hmm. Yeah.
That
I
is
had one, it was a 12-hour round trip drive. But they approved T&E specifically for that one because they had been having issues because you have to cross through Canada to get to it. So it was, or take a boat, and it was so limited in like their access, and they just had problems. And the contractor they were using couldn't cross the border because you can't have a DUI, and it just was this huge, huge mess. And they had the insured take pictures and send them in, but unless you tell them, oh, you need a close up, a wide
yes,
shot. So she just sent close up of the damages, but they denied it because it wasn't good enough photos. And then, she reached out and was complaining. And so finally the higher ups got involved and were like, no, we need to send an adjuster out. And so I got approved for a 12-hour and a hotel to stay overnight.
wow, that's
Yeah.
pretty
Because they
cool.
just needed someone to get out there. So
You
I was
probably
like,
got paid. You,
okay.
you got paid more in those 12 hours than you did on writing the claim, probably.
Yeah, it was such a small loss too. It was a metal roofing, but it was when ice slides off metal roof, it slides off like an avalanche.
Right.
So it had ripped the pipe jack right off the roof, and so then all the water was pouring in to through the ceiling. So it had ruined the ceiling and the hardwood floor or the laminate flooring, but it was such a small area. It was, probably $5,000 claim maybe.
Yeah.
So, but it was just kind of funny, like, but the biggest expense was actually the expense of the contractors having to like haul all the materials up there. So there was like an additional contractor expense, which is I think what the contention point was.
Right. Right. I remember, I forget what hurricane it was, but something like off of North Carolina or something. There was a barrier island,
Hmm.
and everybody had to take a ferry over to the barrier island. It was all multi-million dollar houses. And when they were on the island, they could only drive in golf carts. And
Hmm.
so, you go to Exactimate and you write up an estimate. It could be a beautiful estimate, but it was 3 times as high because they had to bring all of the materials over by ferry. They had all the sheetrock and everything had to go on golf carts.
Hmm.
So it was just crazy. Which,
Yeah. I always
you
think
know,
about, oh, sorry.
no,
I
go
was like,
ahead.
I think about in Michigan, if that were to happen, there's a Mackinac Island. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but there's no motor vehicles allowed. So everything's done by horse and carriage.
Right? Right.
So I was like, I just think about like when I visit that place, I was like, gosh, if there was ever a claim here, I can't imagine like the logistics that would come with it to
Yeah, and
like haul all the materials over there.
the bottom line for us though, we're going and we're identifying the damage.
Hmm.
We're writing an estimate based on what we saw. If we take good photos to document the loss so the company and everybody else knows exactly what it should be,
Hmm.
then when the contractor comes back in 4 times as high as our estimate, there's something to talk about. We've identified everything. They know what's damaged. Now they can actually do the negotiation with the rest of that. So it makes it much easier.
Yeah.
But,
I tend to take a lot of photos. I don't necessarily put them all on my photo report, but
Mhm.
I guess I overtake photos at the claim and multiple angles of the damages. So that way if it does come back and they're like, hey, do you happen to have a photo of maybe this light or, if they thought it looked weird or something. So at least I already have it. So I don't try to overturn in, my photo report unless it's,
Uh-huh.
I've had some where it's been 400 photos just because of the amount of rooms in the building.
Right.
But, I do tend to take a lot of photos, one of each angle of the room, but then I'll only turn in, well, here's the overview. But they're like, oh, do you have one, from this wall showing the window better? Okay. So I have it, so I don't have to go back, but I don't necessarily turn them in up front. So one
Man,
of my
if
recommendations to
you have to
people
go
I'd be is
12
just,
hours round trip to a claim,
yeah, just take as
you
many
better
photos as
take three or four
possible.
hundred photos.
Yeah, so I was like, that'd be one of my recommendations to any adjuster. Just be like, just take as many photos as you need. Like, don't be skimpy. Like, if you think
Right.
it might be blurry, take it again. We all have digital cameras and, or your phones, whatever you use. And
Right.
so you don't have to upload all of them, but at least take tons.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Especially if you have to drive like you do.
Hmm.
So you don't have to tell us this or anything, but has it been financially rewarding being where you are?
Yeah, I do pretty good. I know like it's not probably as good money as the cat adjusters, because I hear the stories from them. I talk to a lot of them. But I like just kind of the steady pace,
Uh-huh.
because the other thing is, I worked my 12-hour 7-day a week shifts and 16-hour days and all that for years in the military and no sleep and stress and I feel like that's what a cat claim is and I'm just like I don't wanna. Like I know the money's there, but I'm just like, nah,
Yeah.
I'm good.
You guys
So
don't
I'll
go to the
stick.
hurricane. I'll stay up here and do
I
whatever's
do, and when there's a hurricane, I get even busier because then I start picking up claims from, the other adjusters that have left, or my area expands even further.
right. Well, and I think once when you and I were talking, you do work in like Minnesota and Wisconsin, Michigan, that kind of stuff
Mhm.
too, right?
Yep.
So do they typically say, "Hey, I got 10 claims over here and I need somebody to handle them." And so you get a bulk of claims and you go and you run for 4 or 5 days and then go back home?
Yeah, that sometimes. So I split my year. I do part of the year in North Dakota and then part of the year over in Minnesota on the border of Wisconsin, just because I have family there.
Uh-huh.
Um, I do a lot of the winter there because there's a lot more people in that area, so generally more of the daily claims.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I had one. I went and worked in Milwaukee for a month just because it started off. They're like, hey, we have about 20 claims. Can you go down? So I was expecting, okay, I'll stay for a couple weeks. And then as I was there, just more and more kept rolling in. They're like, so I was kind of just helping with the backlog they had, but I just stayed longer and longer. And yeah, I like that. There was some tornadoes that went through southern Wisconsin, but they all hit like small farm towns. So each town
Right.
was only like 200 people. So I'd only have two or three claims in each one. But yeah, so it was another just cluster of like 20. And so I went and did a week and then just kind of, but it's worth it. If they're going to give me, 20, 25 claims, I was like, yeah, I'll go stay 2 weeks in a place and do it. Absolutely. I'll
Yeah.
pretty much go anywhere. It's, like, oh, if it's beneficial, like absolutely. If it's two claims, no, but for something like that,
Yeah. Yeah. What's your season like up there? So kind of like April, May, and spring when the snow melts till November-ish. I don't know.
generally, yes. Right now, March, April is when everything's starting to melt, so there's a lot of ice dams.
Uh-huh.
And then you've seen like, well, yesterday a bunch of hail went through, the lower part of the country. I saw that on my reports this
Right.
morning. So usually by mid-May, the hail starts hitting up here, really strong in Minnesota, Wisconsin. Um, tornadoes, wind. So yeah, my summer is really busy with hail and wind claims, and then in the fall, it just kind of depends. We tend to get a lot of late hailstorms. So yeah, I stay pretty busy through November. December has been slow, but 2 years ago we had record snowfall up here. And I was busier probably than I had been all fall because I was doing building collapses, pole
Wow.
barns. Oh, yeah, probably 5 to 6 a week and tree claims.
Uh-huh.
And those require two visits for most insurance companies because they want you to go out and take the pictures while the tree's on the house. But then because it was snow covered, we had to go back in
Right.
the spring and look for any damages to the shingles.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of, two trips on those, but that's to be expected. But yeah, I had at least 5 to 6 claims, sometimes 10 claims a week between trees that had iced up and fell because it was heavy, wet snow, and then the temp plummeted to below zero. So there was 4 to 5 inch of ice. Oh
Right.
yeah, everything fell.
Right.
So that was probably the busiest I've been in a winter. It was ridiculous and there was just no break. But then the spring was weird because like all the snow had caused so much problems all winter and all the ice dams, and then it just spring it was like an instant warm up, so everything just melted immediately. So there was hardly ice dams because it just melted so quickly.
Right.
So it was a weird that's a weird thing. Yeah, when the weather drives your job, it definitely is. It's strange.
I guess that's why they call us adjusters, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Adjust the job and to the weather and
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. What do you drive?
a Ram.
So you got a
Yeah.
four-wheel drive too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I started with my older one. I had an '06 and I bought one 2 years ago, just because that way it was under warranty because so many miles I put on it. But I carry because I do a lot of farms and I needed a 28-foot ladder,
Uh-huh.
so it required a larger vehicle.
Right.
So I
Right.
could maybe put it on a smaller one like a Tacoma or something, but I don't know how well that would, how it would look, probably overhang the
That look
front.
funny up there in North Dakota.
Yeah, so I was like, so I just do so many pole barns with 6 to 18 foot eaves that it's like I just needed a taller ladder. So I have one 20 foot, one 28 foot, and then I carry a little giant for like when I need to go into attics and stuff that I
Right.
can bring into the house.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about farm and ranch because you do a lot of farm and ranch claims, right?
Yes.
So when you're doing a farm and ranch claim, you have to definitely get the deck sheet,
hmm
right?
Oh yeah.
First. And
Yes.
then you have to figure out how many buildings on that policy are covered and what the limits are on
hmm
each of those buildings, right?
Yes. Yep.
Gotcha.
And look at endorsements because tons of them have like cosmetic endorsements for the metal roofings now,
Right.
or if the shingles are too old, they're left out. So there's usually a lot of endorsements on farm and ranch claims.
Gotcha. So before you even go inspect, you have to do all of that
hmm
pre-work, right? And figure out
Yes.
what you're doing. And then when you're actually writing your estimate, do you have to separate your grouping tree or add, you know, building 001, 002
Yeah,
ag coverages?
so yeah, I have a grouping tree solely for farm and ranch
Uh-huh.
that already has like 6 buildings on it, and then I just rename them to match the deck page. And so that way they all just go in order, and sometimes I'll have to add more. I think I had 14 buildings was what I had the most of. There was more inspected, but if there was a lot of grain bins. So if there's no damage, I don't put them on there. I'll just put the pictures
Right.
in the photo report. But yeah, I just go through and I just kind of add the buildings as needed. A lot of times the hardest part is figuring out what the name, or like it'll say machine shed, but it'll just say pole barn 1 and pole barn 3, and then trying to talk with the insured, figured out which one is the actual pole barns. Sometimes that gets a little hard because they don't remember,
Right.
and because they'll all be the same size, and so they'll just be like, well, we'll just go 1, 2, 3, because we don't know.
Right.
So sometimes they're well labeled, or they'll actually have the dimensions on it. It'll say pole barn 70 by 40. Other times it just says pole barn 1, 2, and 3. And
Right.
so both me and the insured are like, I don't know which one's supposed to be which. So we just kind of guess.
Right. Find the one that has the most damage, and that's the pole barn one.
Yeah, yeah. Usually it's like, or depending on, if they're all insured for something different, is one's $100,000 and one's $20,000. And we say, okay, the brand new one's probably the $100,000 one,
Right.
and then the 20,000 is this one that's rusting and falling apart. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's real easy to tell. Other times
But
it's just,
you got 14 buildings on a farm and ranch, you can spend all day, if not a couple days, just on that claim.
oh yeah. I usually, if I'm doing a farm claim, I only do one a day.
Yeah. 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 I did, and I think I told you guys in class, I love doing farm and ranch because, you know, talking with the farmers and seeing their lives and talking about their life and, looking at grandpa's old barn that's been there for
Hmm.
150 years and all the rest of that stuff is awesome.
Yeah, it's usually a lot of fun. And sometimes if it's real bad, like the ones I did last summer, there was huge hail, like 2.5 inch hail that had gone through this skinny strip. So it had ruined a lot of farms, but also their crops. Because it was like June, so everything was coming up. So I'm there doing the property. And there was one, it was the auto adjuster was there doing the cars and equipment, and there was a crop adjuster out in the field. So the farmer was having to like go and he had his farm hands out with the crop adjusters, and
Oh,
we just
really?
all happened to be there like those same couple of days, and it was kind of funny.
Right. Right. Yeah, I know nothing about crop.
I've had to do a couple. It's not too bad. I haven't had to do the full process. I've learned a lot because there's a lot of crop adjusters up here.
Uh-huh.
But I've usually just been sent out to get the photos, especially if it's like right around harvest. I had one, it was 8 hours one way, and they were like they just needed someone to do it like within 48 hours was the problem.
Right.
So they were just calling any adjuster. They were starting close and working their way out. And they were like, I just happened to be the closest that was available at the time because I was doing the, 4 days of paperwork and giving myself some paper days.
Right.
Well, luckily those were my paper days and I was caught up at the time. So I was like, why not? But yeah, it was because it had been some herbicide or something had been sprayed on them incorrectly, so it had killed a lot of the crop. But because they were getting ready to harvest the rest of it, it had to be inspected before they harvest because they have like small windows to get things done.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, so it
Yeah.
was kind of interesting.
Yeah, certainly when I worked Minnesota and anything up in the north part of the country, um, the crop adjusters in my day were usually the farmer down the road. It was kind of
Hmm.
like he was a farmer, and then he became an adjuster, and he would run around to all the farms, and they all knew
That's
you.
what most of the crop adjusters I've met, that's what they are. They're retired farmers that have just
Uh-huh.
gone into adjusting. Some of them are still farming and then they just do adjusting in the fall or as needed. So I've just done a couple just to kind of help out or things like that, just because again, but it's kind of neat just to do something a little different. Same with equipment. I've had to do some farm equipment sometimes,
That's
just because.
that's one of the things that's so cool about what we do because there's
Mhm.
so many different aspects of it, right? So yeah,
Mhm.
you get to go do some crop, you get to learn about that. You get, you know, the combines got broken, and you're like, well, how the heck can I fix a combine? I'll never
Mhm.
forget, and I think it was like 2014. It was one of my last storms, and I was up in uh, Nebraska, and all of the corn was already out of all the bins, right?
Mhm.
So it wasn't harvest. But then this giant windstorm came. So all of these 100,000 bushel bins and everything were just crushed. And the first one I went on was like, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah, that neat. They crush like a beer can when they're
Oh
empty.
my God, when they're empty, they go quick.
Yeah, I've had to do
And
quite a few of those. And then, but those are because Exactimate has they just pay for the bin, like if the whole
yeah,
bin's broken, but you can buy panels and then you have to get the cranes and everything. And if it's pushed off of those, like if the brace is at the bottom and it's anchored in, sometimes those will be broken. So it's
yeah.
like sometimes it's just cheaper to destroy and redo
To
the
buy
whole
a new one.
bin.
Well, because you can't replace one of those lower circles without taking
Mhm.
it off from the top first. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Especially if it has this one was the ones that had all the walkways attached across the top, so all those had to be detached too, which
yeah,
oh thank God, because then we'd have to climb each bin individually, but
yeah. No, I was really fortunate because there was a guy that was in the hotel that's what he did. So he guided me and directed me. And literally most of those that I got, I was like, who's the guy that put up the bin? And
mhm.
then I'd call up the company and I'm like, okay, how much does it cost for 100,000 bushel bin? And most of the time I was able to one line it,
Mhm.
if they were completely destroyed and I could show that they were destroyed. So
Yeah.
yeah, but there's that kind of stuff. And then, you know, Flood's another thing. Liability is a really interesting one. I talked to in one of the podcasts that we just came out here. I was talking a little bit about liability. And, you know, I always said to everybody, I'm a property adjuster. I can fix your framing, I can do whatever, but the rest of this stuff I don't know. But there's so much about liability that actually John drives into Jim's house.
Hmm.
That's a liability claim.
Yeah, I've had several, and I did. When I was thinking liability, I was thinking of someone getting hurt. I've
Right?
never considered, I have had one of those. I just had to go and take the photos. It was someone had slipped and fallen and like hurt themselves. So they were saying that it was because the ice hadn't been cleared outside of like a restaurant or something. So I had to go and take pictures and show like how the handicap spots were near the steps or vice versa. Basically, I just had to go and measure everything about how far were the handicap spots from the ramp versus were they forced to walk across the parking lot? Was this crack that was in the sidewalk a part of it? Which I don't have to, they even said, like, I didn't have to actually make those decisions. I just had to basically give them all the evidence, the on-site evidence they needed of the site. So I just had to measure all the cracks and if they were, different levels of sidewalk. And so I was out there for a couple hours just with my, tape measure at 100-foot measure, just measuring a whole bunch of different things. And
Taking
that was an
pictures,
interesting
taking
one.
measures. You didn't have to sketch anything or anything, did you? Or
Oh, just a kind of a basic overview of, here's the parking lot. So just like a parking lot, sidewalk, restaurant, just an overview. But then everything else was just like, here's the view standing in the parking lot looking at the front. Here is the ramp. Here is the handicap spots. Here is you have to cross this or not cross this, or here's the steps. Here's how tall the steps are or how many, or, so it was just things like that. Are there rails, on the handicap walk?
right,
Things like that. So it was just more, they had a list of things I had to take, and then it was just kind of taking anything else that they thought it might be applicable. So those are one of the claims where I overtake tons and tons of photos. Because
right,
that way, if they're like, oh, did you happen to get one of this angle of the parking lot? I'm like, well, yes, I did. I just, didn't send it in my report because I probably took 300 photos and I probably, you know, of their list they sent, I was only required to probably take about 120 of their specific things they needed. But I was
right.
like, oh no, I'm going to take a bunch because you just never know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I guess that's what we're talking about here, right? We go and we get an adjuster license and it says all lines. What the
Hmm.
heck's an all line?
Yeah.
Right? And then these things come up, farm and ranch, implements, liability and everything. And I think a lot of adjusters that get into this are afraid to do these other kind of adjustments. But just like with that liability, they told you exactly what they needed you to do.
Yeah, so it's super simple. They sent me a checklist and they were like, we need a picture of standing at the door looking at this. And we need a picture, and they told me, they were like, we need measurements of the sidewalks. And so it was pretty easy. And then it was just time consuming, but
You got
and
paid for
then
it.
I told them when they had wanted to know exactly when I'd be inspecting. So they had someone available in case I had questions on site as
Uh-huh.
well. So
They
so they were
did.
extremely supportive. They knew exactly what they wanted. It's just it was kind of such a remote area that it was just easier to send me up than try to probably send someone up from Minneapolis, say.
Right, right, right. Yeah, and these companies that need this kind of help, they're good about giving you direction,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah, yeah, I haven't ran into any companies. Like everyone always asks, like, well, who would you never work for? And I was like, so far I haven't ran into any that like red flags. I'm like, oh, don't work with them. Like I have my favorites, but I haven't ran into any that I'm just like, nope, avoid at all costs. So
Right.
maybe I've been lucky, but
Well, plus you're the only one up there. They're going to be nice to you.
yeah, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Um, let's see, what else can we talk about? Had any run-ins with contractors or anything? How you negotiate with those guys?
No, I haven't had any. I work with a lot of contractors, but I mean, I always hear the horror stories of, PAs and contractors in like Florida and down south, but I don't know if just we have a different brand of contractors up here because I don't generally run into any issues with them.
Right.
I actually prefer them to be there because I like to be on the same page when I leave.
Yeah.
Because, I just had one, I had to do a reinspection because, I met with the contractor and we agreed on the damages on site. Well, then they got a new contractor. And so they were saying, they were like, oh, well, no, these damages on this wall, like that's definitely, loss related. And, even the desk adjuster agreed. He was like, well, based on the pictures you sent, he's like, it sure doesn't look like it, but they're determined that it is. So I had to drive back down there to
Really?
re-agree on the damages. Um, and because it was very directional hail, like the back side of the house looked like Swiss cheese, and then the left elevation where it had kind of hit at an angle. But then the right side, it was under the overhang, and it was this huge. The hail wasn't even that big. It was just this one like hit. It was pretty obvious that as they were carrying something into the house, they had dropped it against the side of the vinyl siding and it had cracked it. But they were determined to say like, nope, that was definitely related to the claim. So we had to go down there and I had to argue with them again just because I don't know if they found a cheaper contractor or switched or quit. I don't know, but it was a
Right.
completely different company. So I had to go back down and meet with them again because they were saying, nope, this is definitely storm related.
Yeah. Yeah. Now,
So, but for
do
the
you
most
find
part, I
do
like
you
working with
do
them.
you find as a woman adjuster that you have to deal with some of these guys, or
So,
I don't want to be,
no, I know
you
what you mean. Yeah, if
know.
they're kind of misogynistic. So actually, it's probably more to the insured sometimes.
Really?
Yeah, they seem more surprised that I'm the one that shows up, even though I talk to them on the phone. They seem even more surprised when I show up with a ladder.
Uh-huh.
Like that's probably what it is. I would say the contractors seem very shocked when I show up with like a ladder or a goat or anything to get on the roof with. They're like, "Oh, well, we didn't think you'd have one." So, or they expect me to have a little giant, which I do, but then when I pull up and I have a nice extension ladder, most of the time they want to use mine.
Uh-huh.
So they're like, "Oh, you have a nice ladder. Can we just use yours?" I'm like, "Yes, you can." But then they take it off the truck and like put it up for me and they carry it, So I'm just
Nice.
like, "Well, whatever. If you want to use my ladder, then I'll let you carry it." I will, but most of the time they're so happy because they have a little, little giant that has this much overhang when it hits the eave and I
Right.
have a full extension ladder that they can put up and so sometimes it's kind of funny. They think they expect me to pull up in a little like Ford Escort or something with like a telescoping ladder in the back. I don't know. So when I
Right.
pull up with a full pickup and boat ladders on the ladder rack,
And you got a
they seem
goat,
surprised.
and you're like, hey, yeah,
Yeah,
10
like
cars,
I'm
let's
ready to
go up
go. So they
there.
seem like really surprised sometimes when I show up, but I haven't ran into issues where they like down talk me or make me like feel like they're not
Cool.
listening to me or anything like that.
Yeah, cool. Cool. I was just wondering
Yeah.
because I was
No, I
wondering.
get asked that question a lot actually. So,
Oh
and I
yeah.
do know some of the women have dealt with it. I talked to them in NACA a lot, and they've, said that, they've showed up and the contractors just start talking to them like they're a child, and they just leave. They'll
Right.
be like, "Nope, I'm not working with you anymore." Either send someone else, and so they'll call the desk adjuster and be like, "Nope, I'm not working with that contractor." So they'll tell them like, you need to stay off the roof. I'll go mark it up. No, 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 let me show you. And they're just so argumentative and bad talking that they just leave and they're like, "Nope, I'll go back if it's a different person or reassign a different adjuster to it because I'm not doing it."
Right. Right.
So
Interesting.
luckily, I haven't had to do that.
Well, and again, man, some of the greatest folks in this country, in my opinion, are Minnesota, Wisconsin,
Mhm.
because I've worked up in those areas, and
Yeah,
they're just the salt of the earth, and they're so cool, and you know, as
yeah.
opposed to maybe Florida, right?
Yeah.
Texas,
And I
some of
hear a
the
lot of, and some of the funny things is like you've worked farm and ranch, you run into these old farmers, and I mean, they'll have like a tree down through their living room. And I'm like, "Oh, it's fine. Like, we can still use
right,
the bedroom." And I'm like, are you kidding me?" Like, they're just totally fine with it, like, because especially if I get a cluster, I'll call and I'll make my appointments, but I always try to call and talk to everyone in person. I know
uh,
like it's faster to do text, but I like to talk to them because I try to get a description of the damages because you've seen the notes. Sometimes they're terrible. It'll just say
right,
tree fell on roof. I'm like, great, the house roof, garage roof, shed, boathouse. Like, I don't know.
Right.
Um, so I try to call and I'll get information and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, it just fell onto this like garage we don't use," and they'll make it sound like it's a detached garage. And I pull up and it's, the one attached to their house and it's like crushed the whole thing. And I'm like, you kind of didn't explain that very well. So sometimes even when I call them, I still don't get a proper, because then I'd be like, I would have prioritized you if I had known that. But they'll make it
Right.
sound like, oh, it's a detached garage. We never use it. Well, that's true. It's storage, but it's still attached to your house. Like versus the shed that was half falling down half a mile from your house.
Big
So
difference. Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
big difference. So I was like, I try to, if I know there's an issue, or especially if I know ALE is involved, I try to prioritize those, but
Mhm.
sometimes it doesn't work
Yeah,
out that way.
and you're so right too about these farmers and ranchers and stuff. Because I had one where the tree literally split the guy's house in half, and he was like, "No, I'm fine."
Hmm.
And when I showed up to the house, I'm like, "No, you're not fine." He's like, "No, yeah, we're just like back here in the bedroom back here, and the plumbing isn't working, but that's okay because I got trees outside." And I'm like, "No,
Yeah.
no, you're not okay."
Yeah. So it's just kind of funny, like some of the stuff that and then I'll pull up to others and they'll have a tree that fell on their fence. Nowhere near the house, and they'll be absolutely irate that, it took me 3 days to get there
Yeah,
when I'm like, it's not even, it's a fence. It's going to be ACV. And
yeah.
it's probably going to be hardly anything, not even over your deductible.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah,
I don't know.
there's no telling, no rhyme or reason for who we go and see, and everybody's different. That's the thing I love most about adjusting is that every single claim was completely different.
Yes.
Even if it was the same storm, same type of
Hmm.
damage, it was just different. The house was
Yeah.
different, the people were different, and that was, I think, for people that are getting into this business, I think that's for me, that was the most exciting part.
Yeah, that's why I like it so much because I'm
Yeah,
not bored, I guess. Like, I mean, there's a difference between busy and then not bored. Because, yes, I can be completely swamped and it keeps me busy, but at least but if it's the same thing I'm doing and kind of a drone necessarily, it's kind of
right.
boring. So, yeah, I like that every house is different. And, a lot of these houses are beautiful. So sometimes it's just, you're there and I'm just admiring the house. You get a water claim and it's one of these ones with carved out banisters and like,
Right.
gorgeous, like, knickknacks all over the house, or they have this like marble, a lot of times they're, if I have the time in between my claims, or that might be the only one for the day, like they'll love to show you around the house, especially if they designed it. Oh,
Yeah.
that's their favorite thing, and I love hearing them talk about it, because they'll be like, oh yeah, like we designed this and we ordered this from like this German place, or I brought this over when I was in Vietnam, and they have all these cool stories. So if you have time, I really like listening to their
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah. And hopefully that wasn't damaged. The thing that you brought over from
Right. Yeah. No,
Vietnam.
yeah. Luckily, no. But sometimes or that is their concern.
Yeah.
Sometimes, depending on what's damaged, they'll be like, oh, we don't care about any of that stuff, but they're really concerned about this like one thing, especially if it's contents. Because, those, depending on what it is, might not be replaceable. But, if it's, yeah, one, it was water damage, but they had hand painted all the murals on the walls. And it was actually like one of their like cousins who's like an artist. And I actually went and looked him up and they had a page. So it was a real artist. So, then it was rather than, homeowner labor just painting, it was the mural rate, which is a lot.
Right.
But it was the whole walls. They had, painted like this like jungle scape across the kid's bedroom, but it was gorgeous. And that was what they were concerned about because the water had like damaged part of it.
And so how did you resolve that?
So I had reached back, they had given me the info to the artist, and so I
Uh-huh.
reached back out to them and I got a quote from them on because I'd sent them the pictures of what was damaged, and then I was talking to them if they could redo just that wall or if they would have to like redo all of it depending on their thing. And they said based on the photos, they believe they could just redo that wall because even though it was like a continuous scene, they felt like they were going to be able to like redo the colors to match enough where it wouldn't be weird looking.
Uh-huh.
And
And
I
this is
didn't
the
get a call
artist.
back. Yep, that was the artist.
Yeah.
So I was talking directly with them because it was kind of an intricate thing. And so they gave me their quote, and then I compared it to the Exactimate because there is a mural line item in there for painting. And it was pretty close to that. So I don't remember which one was less, but I had put that in my report that it was comparable, so they didn't kick it back to be like, oh, that price is outrageous, or
Right. 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 Yeah. I think, in all this conversation here, Nora, it, there's just so much to being an adjuster, and it's such a diverse job. And somebody in this business just needs to be open to whatever's going to come their way and say yes and
Mhm.
figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes you need to think outside the box on things too. So,
A lot of times, for sure, for sure. And I just, you know, so many people get in this because my cousin Jim Bob was an adjuster and he made a bunch of money.
mhm.
And they think that's what it's going to be, and that is not what this business is about. It really
Yeah, it
is.
is a lot of work. Like I love it, and I definitely am glad I got into it. But I work a lot, and like I said, I'm surprised at how much I sit at the computer versus being out in the field sometimes. But
True, true that too. That's the other thing. You know, my cousin Jim Bob's an adjuster, and you think it's all going out there and measuring a roof and taking some pictures and it's over,
mhm,
when you got as much time on that computer for that claim as you did when you were out on the
mhm.
inspection, at least.
Yeah,
And sometimes even more if it's a big tree and it's split the house in half and you got to figure out, is it truss, is it rafter, or, how old is it? What's it made out of? All the rest of that kind of stuff. It takes a lot of time sitting at the computer trying to figure that stuff out. You guys
yeah,
and adjusters today have it so easy as far as I'm concerned because you have Google,
yeah.
right? So if you don't know some, and even more so now, this whole chat GPT thing and this in AI,
Hmm.
I'm going to tell a quick story before we get off here. Um, One of my instructors it was a file reviewer for the fires in California.
Oh,
Okay. So he has a total loss fire and you got debris removal, right? But the problem with those fires is all that ash has toxic stuff in it. So
hmm.
it isn't just like a typical debris removal. Let me take the slab off. You have to actually scrape 6 inches below the last piece of soot that you see
Oh, okay.
to make sure that it's clean.
Hmm.
And then you have to go back with fill dirt.
Oh,
So what I didn't even know this, and I wouldn't have done it even with 22 years experience, right?
hmm.
So he started thinking about this and he researched it and he went to Chat GPT and he was like, okay, what do I need to do in the Pacific Palisades based upon their regulations for a total
Hmm.
fire loss? First, you must scrape the land this month, and then you have to do this. And he said, okay, I have a 6,000-acre lot. How much
Hmm.
equipment and material do I need? And that thing
Oh,
came back in a minute and said, you need a backhoe for 3 days. You need this many 40-yard
wow. I
dumpsters.
never even thought about it.
You need to have all this equipment. He added $18,000 to the estimate
Hmm.
because he asked the question,
Nice. Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So there's so many, and back to Google, you guys, if you have a picture or something, you can put it up and look and find similar materials and similar line items so you can actually write that estimate.
I've done that before, the Google image search on like things that I can't find, or if for discontinued shingles.
Uh,
Because I know you can send in the ITEL report, but if, sometimes I'm waiting a couple days for that. And so, if I can on my photo report be like, okay, well, this photo and here's the matching photo on the, certainteed website saying this already discontinued. That way, when they get the ITEL report, they're not surprised.
right.
And
And you
so,
can write
because
for it. because you've done
Yeah,
that.
so that way I just write up for it when I first send it in, and then a lot of times I don't even have to make a correction. They're just like, oh, well, when you get the report, send it as like backup proof, essentially.
Right.
But
Right.
that's also why I like meeting contractors on site because they, similar to like how you were saying the backhoe and stuff, a lot of times that stuff they recognize, they know when they arrive. They can pull it, be like, oh, well, we already recognize this shingle because it's a certainty, blah, 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 blah. It's been disconnected. So I write that down, take my pictures, and I can go online and be like, yep, discontinued, because I don't recognize the names of those things.
Right.
But they'll be like, well, see how like it slopes off here because that's uneven. So, we can't put a ladder there, which, now I recognize a lot of things. But in the beginning, like they would immediately be like, oh, well, we're going to have a boom lift because there's no way to put a ladder on that angle and keep it safe while carrying shingles up and down. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
So that's why I do like meeting the contractors there because if they have these like weird things they want to request, but we can talk about it on site, so they could be like, well, here's why I need this. I'm like, yeah, okay. I can put that down and see if I can justify it to the insurance because it does make sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if there's, I'll do a lot of times with boom lifts or stuff too, just because if there's a lot of power lines on one side of the house, that might be the one story side of the house, but if it's full of power lines, we can't put your ladders there. So now they need a boom lift to go up the 2-story side for the safety issues of getting the shingles up and down.
Right. Right.
So,
You know what they're doing in Arizona now? Because I just put a roof on one of the houses I was telling you about when we were talking. They just came down here and they got this little boom lift, basically, and they just stacked all the shingles right up on top of the roof. And it
yeah.
was only, I don't know, maybe $250. But when they said that, I'm like, as opposed to carrying up 28 squares of shingle
Yeah.
on a ladder, hell yeah, I'll pay that money all day long.
Yeah. So sometimes it's just a better. It's like, well, yeah, that makes sense rather than wasting hours to send some poor laborer up and down the
Yeah.
ladder. Okay. 200-300 bucks for the day. Here's your boom lift. All right.
Yeah. 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 Well, Nora, it's been awesome, my dear. I
Yeah. It
wish
was
I
good
talked to
talking
you
to you.
more. And, I'll tell a little funny story about you. So when you left here, um, because no. The only thing I worried about was you climbing ladders. But after that first day when you climbed the ladders, I was like, oh, she's gonna be fine. But you were one of those people who came to the school that just focused and paid attention and asked questions when you needed it. So, typically, and a lot of guys that were in your class, I held their freaking hand for months after they
Mhm.
left here, right? And I never had to do that with you. So thanks. You got out, you
Yeah.
were rocking and rolling, and I talk to you when I do and see pictures of you at NACA and that kind of stuff. So
Well, thanks for all your support over the years.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And we're always here for sure. So again, thank you so much for doing this with us.
Yeah.
Um, for everybody that's out there listening or watching, we'll be doing more of these. I think we've got at the recording, so we're recording this middle of March. So I think there's been 6 of them out. So, and you told me, Nora, that you haven't heard them yet.
Yeah, I knew you were
You're
doing it, but I
driving
haven't had a
five
chance to
hours and
listen
you're
to it.
not listening to my podcast. Oh my God, I'm so hurt. No, no. But I think that they're good, and just conversations like we just had is good for people to hear that there's more that they can do, and everybody has a different story, and we've all experienced different things. So, okay.
All
Thanks,
right.
Nora.
See you guys.